The Waldorf lobby glittered like a palace, its marble floor polished to a mirror sheen that caught the golden light of chandeliers. Guests passed through in waves, a blur of briefcases, clinking heels, and the low murmur of conversations carried on the evening air. A string quartet played softly near the bar, elegant notes rising like perfume. At the center of this world stood Richard Moore, billionaire investor, a man whose name alone sent ripples through markets. Tall, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, Richard projected the aura of someone untouchable, a man used to commanding rooms, not being stopped in his tracks. He had just adjusted his cufflinks, preparing to head toward the private elevators, when a voice, soft but piercing, cut through the noise. "Excuse me, sir." Richard paused. Slowly, he turned toward the source. A girl stood near the concierge desk, a small backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, yet her eyes, wide, steady, unflinching, carried a weight that made Richard's stomach tighten. She took a step forward, the polished floor reflecting her sneakers. With the casualness of someone pointing out a detail in a painting, she lifted her hand and gestured at him. No, not at him. At his hand. "Your ring," she said. "My mom said you left her once." 7 words. 7 words that ripped the air apart. Richard froze mid-step. The clinking of glasses, the shuffle of bellboys, even the strains of the quartet seemed to fall away, as though the entire lobby had been suspended in a moment that belonged only to him and this child. "What did you just say?" His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current sharp as broken glass. The girl didn't flinch. "That ring you're wearing. My mom has the same one. She said, you left her once." Richard glanced instinctively at his left hand. The band caught the lobby lights, gleaming innocently. To the world, it was a simple ring, understated, elegant. But to Richard, it was a relic of another life, carved with a secret inscription only 2 people had ever known. His throat tightened. He covered it with a dry chuckle, the kind that usually disarmed shareholders and reporters alike. "That's a very specific thing for a young girl to say. Did your mother put you up to this?" The girl tilted her head. "No. I saw you on the news last week. Mom was watching too." She didn't say much, but she looked at the screen for a long time. Then she whispered, "The ring hasn't changed." Richard's pulse quickened. He masked it with a shake of his head, but unease coiled tight inside him. Around them, subtle attention gathered. A receptionist glanced up from her desk. A couple at the bar leaned slightly closer. No one spoke, but the weight of public curiosity pressed in. Richard leaned down slightly, lowering his voice. "What's your name?" "Naomi." "Naomi," he repeated, tasting the name as if it were foreign. "You shouldn't say things like that to strangers." Naomi's expression didn't change. "You're not a stranger." "Not to my mom." The air thickened, and Richard felt heat rising to his face. He straightened abruptly, tugging at his tie, eager to escape the invisible noose forming in the elegant lobby. But Naomi wasn't finished. Her voice dropped, softer, yet sharper than before. "She told me you stopped wearing it after you left her. But, you put it back on again, didn't you?" Richard's breath caught. A detail no outsider could have known. For a moment, the billionaire's armor cracked. His composure, the polished calm that had silenced boardrooms and heads of state, faltered under the gaze of a 10-year-old girl. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Words failed. From across the lobby, a familiar voice rang out. "Richard." Relief washed through him like a sudden tide. He turned to see Harris, his old acquaintance and board partner, striding forward with the casual ease of a man who belonged everywhere. Harris's sharp eyes flicked from Richard to Naomi, curiosity clear, though he didn't comment. Richard forced a smile. "Just a conversation," he told Harris quickly, as though explaining away a misstep. But as he turned back, Naomi was still there, her gaze unwavering. Calm. Patient. Knowing. The elevator chimed, its doors sliding open in polished silence. Richard stepped inside, Harris following. As the doors began to close, Richard caught one last glimpse of Naomi, standing small but immovable in the grand expanse of the lobby. Her words echoed in his mind, looping like a haunting refrain, "My mom said you left her once." The doors sealed shut. The elevator hummed softly as it carried Richard upward, but his mind was louder than the steel cables pulling him skyward. He tried to shake the girl's words, but they clung like wet clothes. "My mom said you left her once." He stared at the ring, twisting it around his finger as the numbers climbed. Floor 18. 25. 34. The engraving inside pressed faintly against his skin, the hidden message he had written in his own hand a decade ago. 7 words that no one else should have known. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, but Richard didn't step out. He rode back down, unsettled. The lobby was quieter now, a handful of late check-ins, a concierge flipping through papers. Naomi was still there. As if she had been waiting. When she spotted him, her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "You came back." Richard approached slowly. "Naomi, isn't it? Why are you still here?" "I was waiting for my mom," she said, swinging her backpack idly. "She finishes late." Richard nodded, though unease gnawed at him. He glanced at the concierge, who quickly looked away, pretending not to eavesdrop. "You said something before," Richard said carefully. "About my ring." Naomi stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the band. "It has words inside it." "I know, because Mom has one too. She said they're a pair." Richard's chest tightened. He swallowed hard. "What words?" Naomi tilted her head, thinking. "I don't remember all of them. But it was something about storms. About how they pass." The air seemed to vanish from Richard's lungs. He fought to keep his composure, but his heart thundered against his ribs. That inscription had been private, etched during a time when he and Lisa believed nothing could break them. "This storm too shall pass." 7 words. His words. Richard crouched slightly, lowering himself to Naomi's level. "Naomi, who told you that?" Her eyes met his, steady and fearless. "My mom." The world tilted. It wasn't possible. After all these years, after all the silence, could Lisa really be here? Working in this very hotel? Richard stood abruptly, straightening his jacket, masking the storm inside him with practiced elegance. "Naomi, listen to me. Where is your mother now?" Naomi hesitated, chewing her lip. "She's busy. She told me to wait here." "Busy doing what?" Naomi glanced toward the restaurant corridor. "She works here. She's a manager. But she doesn't want to see you yet." Richard's breath caught. The name whispered itself across his memory like a ghost, Lisa. It couldn't be coincidence. He tried to press further, but Naomi's small shoulders stiffened, her chin lifting with a surprising firmness. "I think she'll talk to you when she's ready." Before Richard could reply, a bellhop passed with a cart of silver trays, clattering noisily. Naomi seized the moment, shouldering her backpack. "I have to go now," she said simply. "Naomi." But she was already moving, her sneakers padding across the marble floor, swallowed by the corridor leading to the staff areas. Richard remained frozen, the weight of the moment anchoring him in place. His eyes dropped to the ring again, its polished surface catching the light like a cruel reminder. The lobby felt emptier now, though the silence carried more weight than before. A secret had cracked open, and Richard knew it was only the beginning. The bar on the mezzanine level was dimly lit, its shelves lined with rare whiskies and cognacs. Richard sat with a glass of still water before him, untouched, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. The lobby encounter replayed in his mind like a broken reel of film, Naomi's small finger pointing at his ring, her steady voice echoing, "My mom said you left her once." He turned the ring slowly, feeling the faint ridges of the inscription hidden inside. Words he had written for Lisa years ago, words that were never meant to echo back through the mouth of a child. "Still nursing water at this hour?" The voice snapped him from his thoughts. Harris Weston, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and dressed in a charcoal suit that managed to look both expensive and effortless, slid onto the stool beside him. Richard forced a smile. Not in the mood for anything stronger. Harris glanced at him, then at the ring Richard had unconsciously been twisting. "That's not like you. You only brood when something from the past creeps back in." Richard didn't answer, but Harris had known him too long to need confirmation. "Let me guess," Harris continued, signaling for a drink. "Old ghosts. They have a way of finding us when we least expect it." Richard's jaw tightened. "You ever feel like the past is a storm you thought you'd outflown, only to find it waiting around the next bend?" Harris chuckled softly, though his eyes remained serious. "Storms don't disappear, Richard. They circle. And sometimes, they come back stronger." Richard finally met his gaze. "A girl approached me tonight. 10 years old, maybe. She said something she couldn't possibly have known." Harris leaned back slightly. "And yet she knew." "Yes." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint clink of glasses being polished by the bartender. Harris swirled his whiskey slowly. "Some doors," Harris said finally, "aren't meant to stay closed forever. You can build empires, stack up all the money in the world, but the past? It has claws. And if it wants you, it will find you." Richard's hand stilled on the ring. His mind pulled back to memories he had spent years locking away, Lisa laughing in the rain, Lisa whispering his name in the quiet of dawn, Lisa's sudden disappearance like a knife cut through his life. He stood abruptly. "I should get some rest." "Rest?" Harris raised an eyebrow. "You look like a man who won't be sleeping tonight." Richard forced a dry smile. "You're probably right." That night, in the solitude of his penthouse suite, sleep refused him. The city glittered below, restless and bright, but Richard's thoughts were darker. He poured a glass of scotch and sat by the window, staring at the skyline as though it might hold answers. He twisted the ring again and again, until the skin beneath it reddened. His mind replayed Naomi's words, her steady gaze. "My mom said you left her once." And beneath that, the whisper of another memory, Lisa's voice, years ago, when she had slipped the matching ring onto her own finger. "This storm too shall pass." Her eyes had been so full of belief back then. Belief in him. In them. Richard closed his eyes, the burn of the scotch lingering in his throat. How had it all gone so wrong? He remembered the night she vanished. No warning. No goodbye. Just absence. He had searched, half-heartedly at first, then desperately. But Lisa had been like smoke, disappearing through cracks he couldn't seal. Eventually, he had buried himself in work, in success, in distraction. He had told himself she was gone for good. And now, a girl with her eyes had reopened the wound. The night stretched long. Shadows shifted across the room as the hours passed, but Richard did not sleep. By dawn, the scotch was gone, and the drawing Naomi had given him, 3 figures at a dinner table, smiling, lay unfolded on the desk. He stared at it with a mix of awe and dread. The past wasn't just whispering anymore. It was knocking at his door. The hotel restaurant was alive with its usual rhythm the next evening. Glasses chimed. Cutlery whispered against porcelain. A pianist in the corner filled the air with gentle notes, music meant to soothe guests paying more for ambience than food. Richard hadn't planned to be here again, but his feet carried him as though guided by something heavier than intention. He told himself it was curiosity, that he wanted clarity. But deep down, he knew it was something else entirely, an ache that had never healed. And then, across the room, he saw her. Lisa. She moved with the confidence of someone who had worked hard to earn her place. Crisp uniform, hair pinned back neatly, clipboard tucked under one arm. Her posture was straighter, her movements deliberate. She wasn't the carefree woman he remembered. But even at a distance, he recognized the way she carried herself, grace, restraint, and a quiet strength. For a moment, Richard couldn't breathe. Lisa glanced up, and their eyes locked. The space between them seemed to collapse. For half a heartbeat, recognition flickered across her face, like lightning flashing behind clouds. Then it was gone, buried beneath a cool, professional mask. She approached, calm as ever. "Mr. Moore," she said, voice measured. "I trust your stay has been comfortable." Richard almost flinched at the formality. "Mr. Moore." As though they had never shared whispered promises in the dead of night. "Lisa," he said softly. The name felt fragile in his mouth, like glass he might shatter just by speaking it. Her lips pressed together, forming a polite, closed smile. "Please don't cause a scene." He leaned forward, voice low. "After all this time, that's all you have to say." "I have nothing to say," Lisa replied flatly. "I'm here to do my job. And you are a guest. Let's leave it at that." Richard studied her, searching for cracks in the facade. But Lisa's expression was iron. Only her eyes betrayed her, glinting with something deeper, pain, maybe, or anger carefully disguised. Finally, he spoke. "Naomi came to me." For the first time, her composure slipped. A flicker of alarm crossed her face before she regained control. "She shouldn't have. She told me about the ring," Richard continued, pressing. "She knew what was inscribed inside. She couldn't have made that up." Lisa's jaw tightened. "She's a child. Children repeat things they don't understand." Richard shook his head. "No. She knew. She knew too much." His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "She knew enough to make me wonder." Lisa's eyes flicked briefly to his hand, to the ring gleaming under the restaurant's light, before darting away. Richard leaned closer across the table he had claimed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lisa drew in a sharp breath, as though the air itself had turned against her. But she quickly straightened, her tone firm. "Mr. Moore, if you need anything from the staff, you can speak to the concierge. Otherwise, I suggest you enjoy your evening." With that, she turned on her heel, walking briskly away before he could answer. Richard sat frozen, staring at her retreating form. The noise of the restaurant returned in waves, clinking cutlery, murmured conversations, the piano's soothing notes. But he felt none of it. Instead, the echo of Lisa's voice, clipped, cold, unfamiliar, rang in his ears. "Mr. Moore." Not Richard. Not the name she used to whisper with warmth. Just Mr. Moore, a deliberate wall built brick by brick between them. Later that night, Richard stood outside the hotel, watching the steady rain paint the pavement with silver streaks. Harris joined him, hands tucked into his overcoat. "She saw you, didn't she?" Harris asked. Richard didn't answer. His silence was enough. Harris exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself against a truth he'd already anticipated. "And?" Richard clenched his jaw. "She acted like we were strangers. Maybe that's the only way she can survive." Richard turned sharply. "She had a daughter, Harris. She has Naomi. And that girl," his voice cracked slightly before he regained control. "That girl knows things only Lisa could have told her." Harris's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then you already know what that means." The rain intensified, tapping against the awning like impatient fingers. Richard slipped his hands into his pockets, his thumb brushing the folded drawing Naomi had given him, 3 figures at a table, smiling. He looked out at the wet, gleaming city. "She can try to act like I'm a stranger. But the truth won't stay buried." Harris gave a slow nod. Then be ready. Because when the truth comes up for air, it doesn't just whisper. It roars. The hotel lobby was quieter that Thursday evening. The usual crowd of travelers and suited executives had thinned, leaving behind a softer murmur of conversation and the faint echo of heels against marble. Richard hadn't planned to linger. He told himself he was there for a meeting that ran late, that he just happened to stop by the lobby bar before heading up. But the truth gnawed at him, he was waiting. And then, as though summoned by that gnawing ache, Naomi appeared. She was curled in one of the oversized armchairs near the fireplace, a book balanced on her lap. Her backpack leaned against the chair leg, worn but decorated with colorful pins. She looked up when he entered, her eyes lighting with recognition. "You came back," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Richard hesitated, then crossed the marble floor toward her. "Looks like you've made this lobby your second home." "Mom works late," Naomi replied, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Sometimes I wait here." Richard nodded, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. He adjusted his cufflinks out of habit, though his attention was fixed solely on the girl. "What are you reading?" he asked. Naomi held up the cover. "A book about stars. I like space. It makes me feel small, but also, like anything is possible." Richard found himself smiling. "That's a wise observation." Naomi tilted her head. "Do you always talk like that? Like you're giving a speech?" The question caught him off guard. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Old habits. I guess I do." Naomi studied him for a long moment. "You didn't answer me last time." Richard leaned forward slightly. "Answer what?" Her voice dropped, steady and piercing. "Are you my father?" The word struck him like a blow. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He searched her face, those sharp eyes that seemed to carry Lisa's strength, and felt the weight of a truth he wasn't ready to claim. "That's not a question I can answer without your mother," Richard said carefully. Naomi's shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "She won't tell me. She just says you're complicated." Richard laughed once, dry and humorless. "She's not wrong." Naomi tilted her head again, unrelenting. "Did you love her?" The question was simple, but it cracked something open in him. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Very much." Naomi seemed to consider that. She closed her book, resting it on her lap. "Then why did you leave?" Richard exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "It wasn't that simple." "It's always simple," Naomi replied softly. "People either stay, or they don't." Her words cut deeper than any accusation. He watched her swing her legs slowly, sneakers brushing the chair. For all her bluntness, there was no malice in her tone, only curiosity, and maybe a longing she couldn't quite name. "Your mother is strong," Richard said finally. "Stronger than anyone I know. If she made choices, she made them for you." Naomi's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "That doesn't mean they didn't hurt." Richard swallowed hard, unable to argue. The conversation shifted when Naomi pulled a sketchbook from her backpack. "I like to draw," she said, flipping through pages filled with stars, animals, and buildings. Then she turned to a fresh page and began sketching quickly, her pencil scratching lightly. Richard watched, curious. "What are you drawing now?" "You'll see." Minutes passed, the sound of the pencil filling the silence between them. Finally, she tore the page out carefully and slid it across to him. It was a drawing of two rings, side by side. One was large, the other smaller, but both carried the same tiny inscription, "This storm too shall pass." Richard stared at it, his throat tightening. Naomi looked at him expectantly. "Mom told me about the words. She said you gave them to her. So I drew them for you." He folded the paper carefully, slipping it into his jacket pocket as though it were a priceless artifact. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." The moment lingered, fragile but powerful. Richard realized he was no longer talking to Naomi as a stranger. She had already anchored herself inside him, a living reminder of what he had lost, and what he might still find. A sharp voice broke the silence. "Naomi." Both of them turned. Lisa stood at the far end of the lobby, her expression unreadable but her tone edged with warning. Naomi hesitated, glancing at Richard. He gave her a small nod. "Go on," he said softly. She packed her sketchbook and backpack quickly, then slipped off the chair. Before leaving, she looked up at him one last time. "If you loved her, prove it." The words landed heavier than any business deal Richard had ever faced. As Naomi walked toward her mother, Richard caught Lisa's eyes. They were dark, guarded, and filled with things left unsaid. She held Naomi's hand firmly and led her away without another word. Richard sat back, the folded drawing burning against his chest. Naomi's voice echoed in his mind like a verdict: "If you loved her, prove it." For the first time in years, Richard Moore, the man who had conquered boardrooms, toppled rivals, and built an empire, felt utterly powerless. The rain had thinned to a drizzle by the time Richard stood outside the modest brick apartment building in Queens. The neighborhood was quiet, a far cry from the glittering towers of Manhattan where he usually spent his nights. He adjusted his coat, staring at the scrap of paper in his hand. Naomi had slipped it to him days earlier, folded into the corner of her sketchbook when Lisa wasn't looking. Just an address. No note. No instructions. But the meaning was clear. Richard hesitated, feeling strangely like an intruder. He was a man who could walk into boardrooms uninvited and command attention, but standing here, before this simple apartment door, he felt disarmed. Vulnerable. Finally, he knocked. The door opened a crack, and Naomi's face peeked out. Her eyes widened, lighting up instantly. "You came." Richard smiled, though nerves tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I said I would." Naomi flung the door open wider. "Mom, he's here." From deeper inside, Lisa's voice called back, laced with irritation. "Naomi, I told you." She stepped into view, apron tied around her waist, and froze when she saw him. Her expression hardened. "You weren't invited." Naomi planted her hands on her hips. "I invited him." Richard lifted his palms slightly in peace. "If it's not a good time, I'll go." Lisa glared at him, then at her daughter. Naomi folded her arms stubbornly, clearly unwilling to let this go. With a resigned sigh, Lisa muttered, "Fine. But it's just dinner. Nothing more." Richard stepped inside. The apartment was small but warm. The scent of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of a jazz station on the radio. The living room was tidy, though the corner was cluttered with Naomi's books and art supplies. At the kitchen table, 3 places were set. Richard noticed the careful detail in the mismatched cutlery and the faded but clean tablecloth. It wasn't wealth, but it was care. Naomi beamed as she pointed proudly to the salad bowl. "I made that." Richard leaned over to inspect it. "It looks delicious. Better than anything I could make." Naomi giggled. "Do you even cook?" He chuckled. "I can make eggs. And I'm very skilled at ordering takeout." Naomi laughed harder, and for the first time that evening, even Lisa's lips twitched into a reluctant smile. Dinner began with awkward silence. Richard focused on cutting his chicken, Lisa kept her eyes on her plate, and Naomi chattered cheerfully about school. "I'm drawing constellations for science class," Naomi said between bites. "Did you know Orion has a belt of 3 stars?" Richard nodded. "I did. When I was your age, I wanted to be an astronaut." Naomi's eyes widened. "Really?" He smiled faintly. "Really. But life, had other plans. Lisa glanced at him briefly, then looked away. Naomi, oblivious to the tension, continued. Well, I'm going to be an artist and an astronaut. I'll draw the stars from space. Richard raised his glass of water in a mock toast. Then you'll be the first person to hang paintings in orbit. Naomi grinned, clinking her juice glass against his. The ice around the table began to thaw, if only slightly. Conversation picked up in small bursts, mostly Naomi carrying it with enthusiasm. Richard listened intently, asking gentle questions about her drawings, her favorite books, her dreams. At one point, Naomi excused herself to grab her sketchbook from the living room. She returned quickly, flipping through pages until she landed on a fresh one. I want to draw this, she announced. So I remember the first time you came for dinner. She began sketching rapidly, pencil moving in quick strokes. Richard and Lisa exchanged a glance. His hopeful, hers wary, before both returned their attention to their plates. When Naomi finished, she held up the drawing proudly. 3 figures sat at a small table, smiling. The details were simple but unmistakable, Lisa with her hair pinned up, Richard in his suit, Naomi between them. Richard's chest tightened. The image hit him harder than any corporate victory or financial loss ever could. Naomi tore the page carefully from her sketchbook and slid it across the table. Here. It's for you. Richard folded it gently, sliding it into his jacket pocket as though it were made of glass. Thank you. I'll keep it safe. Lisa cleared her throat, her voice tight. It's getting late. Naomi has school tomorrow. Naomi groaned. Just a little longer. No, Lisa said firmly. Bed. Naomi huffed, but leaned over to hug Richard quickly before disappearing down the hallway. The apartment felt suddenly smaller without her. Silence stretched between Richard and Lisa. You shouldn't have come, Lisa said at last. Richard met her gaze steadily. And yet I did. Her expression was weary, conflicted. Naomi's world is simple. Stable. I won't let you disrupt that. I don't want to disrupt it, Richard said quietly. I want to be part of it. Lisa shook her head, turning away. It's not that simple. Richard's hand brushed the folded drawing in his pocket. Maybe it is. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the radio filled the silence, a soft jazz tune that seemed almost too gentle for the storm between them. Finally, Lisa sighed, her shoulders sinking. Good night, Richard. He nodded, accepting the dismissal. But as he stepped back into the cool night air, the drawing pressed against his chest, he knew he wasn't walking away. Not this time. The following evening, Richard waited in the shadows of the staff exit behind the hotel. The alley smelled faintly of rain and city smoke, the hum of traffic distant but constant. He knew Lisa would come this way, Naomi had mentioned it casually over dinner, unaware she had armed him with the detail. At exactly 10 minutes past 9, the metal door creaked open. Lisa stepped out, tucking her clipboard under her arm, her hair loosened from its pins. She froze when she saw him. Richard. Her tone was sharp, edged with warning. He straightened. We need to talk. Her eyes narrowed. We've said enough already. No, Richard said firmly. You've said nothing. You've acted like we're strangers, when you and I both know we're not. You owe me an explanation. Lisa exhaled sharply, as if trying to blow away the pressure building in the night air. I don't owe you anything. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Naomi knew about the inscription inside the ring. How could she know that unless you told her? Lisa flinched, the tiniest reaction, but enough. Richard pressed. Why did you leave, Lisa? One day you were there. The next, gone. No note, no call. Just, gone. Lisa's expression hardened. Because I had to. That's not an answer. She looked away, staring at the wet pavement. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint drip of water from a nearby gutter. Finally, she spoke. "Do you remember Marcus Hale?" The name struck Richard like a slap. "Of course." Lisa nodded slowly. "You were closing deals with him. Deals that weren't clean. He wasn't just a businessman, Richard, he was dangerous. And you knew it." Richard clenched his jaw. "That was years ago. I walked away from him. But not soon enough." Lisa's voice trembled now, anger laced with fear. "You were in deeper than you admitted. And when I realized who he really was, I couldn't stay." Richard shook his head. "So you vanished? Without even telling me why?" Her eyes flashed. "I didn't just vanish. I was protecting myself." "Protecting?" She stopped abruptly, biting back the word. "Protecting who?" Richard demanded. Silence again. Then, quietly, she whispered, "Naomi." The ground seemed to shift beneath Richard's feet. He stared at her, stunned. You were pregnant?" His voice cracked. "And you didn't tell me?" Lisa's jaw tightened, but tears glistened in her eyes despite her effort to hide them. "Yes. I found out days before I left. And when I realized Marcus and his men were circling closer, when I saw the danger growing. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk her." Richard's breath came fast, uneven. A dozen emotions warred inside him, anger, grief, guilt, longing. "You should have told me," he said, his voice raw. "And what would you have done?" Lisa shot back. "Pulled me into your world of boardroom wars and rivalries. Let Marcus use me as leverage against you." "No, Richard. I made the only choice I could. I disappeared. For her." Richard ran a hand through his hair, pacing a step before facing her again. "Do you have any idea what it did to me? Wondering where you went. Why you left. I searched, Lisa. 4 months. And then I told myself you were gone forever. That I had to bury it." Lisa's tears finally broke free, though her voice remained steady. "I know. And I'm sorry. But you weren't the only one who had to bury something." Her hand pressed briefly against her chest. "I buried the hope that you'd ever know her. I buried the chance at a family, because I believed it was the only way to keep her safe." Richard's shoulders sagged. The ring on his finger felt heavier than ever, pressing into his skin like a reminder of everything lost. "I should hate you," he whispered. "But I can't." Lisa shook her head. "Don't make this harder. You don't belong in her life. Not now." Richard stepped closer, his eyes burning into hers. "She already let me in, Lisa. Whether you like it or not. Naomi, she knows. And she deserves the truth." Lisa looked away, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't argue. Richard reached into his pocket, pulling out Naomi's drawing of the rings. He held it up between them. "She gave me this. She believes in something you're too afraid to admit, that storms pass. That maybe, just maybe, it isn't too late." Lisa stared at the paper, her lips trembling. But then she shook her head, retreating a step. "Go home, Richard," she whispered. "Please." Before he could answer, she turned and hurried down the street, disappearing into the night's drizzle. Richard stood in the alley, Naomi's drawing still trembling in his hand. The partial truth was out. But the full storm was still to come. Richard's driver pulled the Bentley to the curb outside the hotel. The city glowed with its usual pulse, headlights, neon signs, and the endless rhythm of movement. But Richard barely noticed. His mind churned with Lisa's words. Pregnant. Naomi. Protection. The revelation gnawed at him. He replayed it in loops, Lisa standing in the drizzle, her voice trembling but firm. Every fiber of him ached to demand more answers, but another part of him believed her. Believed she had vanished because danger had shadowed his world. As he stepped from the car, something tugged at the edges of his awareness. A sedan sat idling across the street, its windows tinted darker than city law allowed. The engine purred low, steady. Richard paused, watching. The driver didn't move. The car didn't pull away. Richard's instincts, honed from years of business rivalries and cutthroat deals, prickled. This wasn't a taxi waiting for a fare. This was something else. He entered the hotel quickly, but the weight of those unseen eyes followed him inside. Later, in the mezzanine bar, Harris swirled a glass of whiskey as Richard relayed the evening. He spoke of Lisa's partial confession, of Naomi's drawing, of the shadows from his past rising again. And finally, he mentioned the sedan. Harris's eyes sharpened. Describe it. Black. Unmarked. Too clean for this neighborhood. Been there more than once. Tonight it was parked across the hotel. Harris leaned back, thoughtful. That's no coincidence. You think it's Marcus? I think Marcus never stopped circling you. You walked away from his deals, Richard, but men like him, they don't forget. And if Lisa left because of him, then Naomi is leverage. Richard stiffened. The word alone, leverage, made his stomach turn. She's just a child, Richard muttered. Harris's voice was grim. That's exactly why she's useful to men like Marcus. The thought of Naomi, fearless, curious Naomi, caught in the crosshairs of a man like Marcus Hale sent a cold fury through Richard's veins. That night, Richard stood at his penthouse window, city lights spread like a jeweled blanket beneath him. But his focus was drawn to the street far below. The same sedan was there again, parked a block away. Waiting. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, the ring catching the dim glow. He twisted it restlessly, the hidden inscription pressing into his skin like a warning. This storm too shall pass. But this storm wasn't passing. It was circling closer. The next day, Richard had Naomi again in the lobby. She greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, waving her sketchbook before plopping into the chair opposite his. Guess what? She said brightly. I drew you as a superhero. He smiled faintly, taking the page. There he was, cape billowing, ring glowing like a beacon on his hand. Naomi grinned proudly. But Richard's smile faltered as he noticed something outside the glass doors. The sedan. Parked again. A different driver this time, but the same car. Same waiting silence. He forced his expression to remain calm for Naomi's sake. That's incredible, Naomi. You made me look stronger than I really am. She frowned. You are strong. Mom says you're stubborn too, but strong. Richard's chest tightened. He slid the sketch carefully into his jacket pocket. I'll keep this one too. When Naomi was called away by a staff member, Richard excused himself quickly, striding out into the street. He approached the sedan, his steps sharp. The driver rolled the window down just enough for Richard to see a pair of cold eyes. Then, without a word, the car pulled away smoothly, melting into traffic. Richard stood on the curb, fists clenched. This wasn't paranoia. It was confirmation. That evening, back in the bar, Harris listened grimly. They're watching me, Richard said flatly. Watching Naomi. Maybe Lisa too. Harris leaned forward, voice low. Then you need to face the truth. This isn't about business anymore. This is about blood. Richard's hand closed around his glass, knuckles white. If Marcus is circling, then he's already too close. Harris gave a slow, heavy nod. Then we prepare. Richard's gaze dropped to the folded drawings Naomi had given him, tucked safely in his pocket. Innocent sketches, but to him they were battle flags. Proof of what was at stake. For the first time in years, Richard wasn't thinking about empires or legacies. He was thinking about survival. And this time, he swore, he wouldn't let Lisa or Naomi bear the cost of his past. The phone rang just after midnight. Richard was in his penthouse study, Naomi's sketches spread across the desk like talismans he couldn't let go of. He picked up without glancing at the caller ID, expecting Harris or his assistant. But the voice on the other end froze him. Well. Richard Moore. Still up late polishing your empire? The voice was smooth, taunting, wrapped in venom. Richard knew it instantly. Marcus. A low chuckle drifted through the line. I wondered how long it would take before you noticed me watching. You were always sharp, Richard. Sharper than most. But you should know by now, you can't outrun debts. Richard's grip on the phone tightened. What do you want? Want? Marcus sounded amused. Want is such a small word. Let's say I'm collecting. You walked away from our arrangement years ago, and I let it slide. But then, imagine my surprise when I find something, or should I say someone, you left behind. Richard's blood ran cold. Leave them out of this, he said sharply. Oh, so you admit they exist. Marcus's chuckle was darker this time. Lisa. Naomi. A neat little family portrait you never finished painting. Sweet girl, by the way. Brave. She doesn't even realize the kind of fire she's standing next to. Rage boiled in Richard's chest. If you touch them. Relax. Marcus cut him off, his tone chillingly casual. If I wanted them gone, Richard, they'd already be. But leverage is more useful than destruction. You taught me that once. Richard's jaw clenched. He remembered. Years ago, when their business partnership thrived, he had lectured Marcus about leverage, about pressure points in negotiations. Now the lesson had come back like a knife in his own hand. What do you want? Richard repeated, voice low and deadly. Simple, Marcus replied. You still have influence. Connections. Doors that open for you that remain locked for others. I want you to open one of those doors for me. Consider it, repayment. Richard's mind raced. And if I don't? The silence on the other end was heavier than words. Then Marcus whispered, then Lisa and Naomi learn what storms really look like. The line clicked dead. Richard stood frozen, the phone pressed to his ear, the city lights glowing far below him like indifferent stars. The next morning, Harris found him at the bar, hollow-eyed from a sleepless night. He called, Richard said without preamble. Harris's face darkened. Marcus. Richard nodded. He knows about Lisa. About Naomi. Harris cursed under his breath. Then it's worse than I thought. Richard leaned forward, his voice fierce. He threatened them. Said their leverage. Harris didn't flinch. He means it. Marcus doesn't bluff. Richard's hand closed around his glass. I won't let him touch them. You might not have a choice, Harris warned. He's already watching. Already circling. If he wants to use them, he will. The question is, how do you stop him before he strikes? Richard thought of Naomi's drawings. The rings. The family portrait she had sketched with such hope. His heart clenched. I don't care about leverage. I don't care about his deals. All I care about now is keeping them safe. Harris nodded slowly. Then you'll have to face him head-on. Richard's eyes hardened. Then that's what I'll do. That evening, Richard sat in the lobby again, waiting. Naomi appeared as usual, running up to him with her bright smile. But tonight, he couldn't mirror her joy. His eyes scanned the street outside, searching for the sedan. Naomi noticed. You look worried. Richard forced a small smile. Just tired. She frowned. You don't look just tired. Richard hesitated, then crouched slightly to meet her eyes. Naomi, I need you to do something for me. No matter what happens, you stay close to your mom. Don't wander off. Understand? Naomi tilted her head, sensing the weight in his tone. Are we in trouble? Richard's throat tightened. He wanted to say no, to shield her with words. But he couldn't lie. Not to her. Maybe, he admitted softly. But I promise you this, I won't let anyone hurt you. Naomi's small hand reached out, slipping into his. Then I believe you. Her trust, simple and absolute, felt heavier than Marcus's threats. That night, alone again in his suite, Richard stared out at the city. The storm was no longer whispering at the edges. It was here, full force, with Marcus Hale at its center. And for the first time, Richard realized, this wasn't just about reclaiming a lost love or meeting a daughter he never knew. This was war. Lisa's apartment was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. Rain pattered lightly against the window panes, the city's glow muted by the storm outside. Naomi was already in bed, the soft hum of her nightlight drifting down the hallway. Richard stood near the kitchen table, his hands braced on the wood. Lisa faced him from across the room, arms crossed tightly, eyes guarded. He had come without warning, knocking until she answered. Now, tension filled the small space like static before lightning. She knows, Richard said finally. His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it pulsed something raw. Marcus. He knows about you. About Naomi. Lisa's eyes flickered, but her expression didn't break. Of course he does. That's why I left in the first place. Richard pushed off the table, pacing a step closer. You think running kept you safe? He was circling then, and he's circling now. You can't hide forever. Her arms tightened around herself. Hiding worked for 10 years. Did it? Richard's voice sharpened. He found you anyway. He's been watching. Waiting. Naomi is in danger because of me. Because of my past. Lisa flinched at the word danger, but she stood her ground. Don't you think I've lived with that every day? Every night I checked the locks twice. Every time Naomi walked home from school, I held my breath until she was inside. Do you think I wanted this? Richard's chest heaved. Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me protect you both? Lisa's voice cracked, sharp with pain. Because you were part of the world that created the danger. You built your empire in smoke-filled rooms with men like Marcus. I couldn't drag a child into that. I couldn't risk her being used against you. Silence hung heavy. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Richard's hand rose to his ring, twisting it unconsciously. I left that world. I walked away from Marcus the moment I understood who he really was. Lisa's eyes burned with restrained fury. But by then it was too late. I was already gone. Already pregnant. Her voice trembled on the last word, the weight of it still raw after all these years. Richard stopped pacing, his face softening. Lisa. She shook her head, tears brimming. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because loving you could have killed us. The words landed like a blow. For years, Richard had told himself she abandoned him, that she chose freedom over him. But now, the truth cut deeper, she had left to save their child. Richard stepped closer, his voice softer. You carried that burden alone. For Naomi's entire life. Lisa's breath caught, but she didn't deny it. I should have been there, Richard whispered. Not Marcus. Not the shadows. Me. I should have been there. For the first time, her eyes softened, vulnerability slipping through the cracks. And now you are. But it might be too late. Richard shook his head fiercely. No. Not this time. I won't let him touch you. I won't let him touch her. Lisa's lips trembled. You can't fight Marcus. He has reach. Power. Men who don't care about collateral damage. Richard's jaw tightened. Then I'll become the storm he never saw coming. Lisa blinked at him, startled by the conviction in his tone. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken history, unspent love, and the shadow of danger looming over all of it. From down the hallway, Naomi stirred, her small voice drifting into the tension. Mom. Lisa turned instinctively, but Richard caught her hand before she could move. Their eyes locked. Trust me, he said. Just this once. Trust me to keep her safe. Lisa's breath trembled as she exhaled, torn between fear and something else, the faint glimmer of hope she had buried for a decade. Finally, she whispered, if you fail us again, Richard, there won't be another chance. Richard nodded, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders like armor. I won't fail. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, the storm above echoing the one within. The Hudson River lapped against the pilings, black and restless under the cover of night. Cargo cranes loomed like skeletal giants against the skyline, their long arms frozen in place. A fog rolled in from the water, muffling the city's usual roar. Richard stood near the entrance of the old warehouse, collar of his coat turned up against the chill. Harris stood beside him, calm as ever, though his hand rested casually on the revolver holstered beneath his jacket. This place still smells like rust and ghosts, Harris muttered, eyeing the broken windows above. Richard kept his gaze on the dark water. It'll do. They had leaked the location through a trusted channel, knowing Marcus would take the bait. It wasn't subtle, but subtlety wasn't what this moment needed. It needed confrontation. Finality. Headlights cut through the fog. A convoy of black sedans rolled to a stop at the edge of the pier. Doors opened. Men in dark suits stepped out, their movements precise, practiced. And then Marcus Hale emerged. He looked older than Richard remembered, but no less dangerous. His tailored coat swayed in the breeze, his expression smug. Richard Moore, Marcus drawled as he approached. You still know how to pick dramatic settings. What is this? A reconciliation, or an execution? Richard stepped forward. Neither. This is a warning. Marcus laughed, sharp and humorless. You think you can warn me? After the way you walked away? After the mess you left? You've had 10 years to move on, Richard shot back. But instead, you've been circling. Watching. Threatening what's mine. Marcus's smile widened, wolfish. Ah. So you admit it. The girl. Naomi. She is yours. Richard's fists clenched. Leave her out of this. Why would I? Marcus's tone was almost casual. She's leverage. The perfect pressure point. That woman of yours, Lisa, she always had fire in her, but fire burns out fast when someone she loves is dangling over the edge. Harris stepped forward, voice hard. You so much as breathe near that child, Marcus, and I'll put you in the ground. Marcus's men shifted, hands drifting to weapons beneath their coats. Harris didn't flinch. Marcus tilted his head. So this is your grand plan? Meet me on a dock in the middle of the night? Threaten me with words? Richard's voice cut through the fog. No. My plan is to end this. Right here. He gestured slightly. Floodlights blazed on, cutting through the fog, revealing NYPD officers moving into position at the far end of the dock. Guns raised. Voices shouted commands. For the first time, Marcus's smug grin faltered. Richard stepped closer, his voice low enough for only Marcus to hear. I told you. This is a warning. You don't touch them. You don't follow them. You don't even whisper their names. If you do, you won't just be facing me. You'll be facing every set of eyes watching you tonight. Marcus's smile returned, thinner this time. He raised his hands slowly, mockingly, as his men did the same. Police swarmed, securing weapons, shouting orders. But as officers moved in, Marcus leaned close, his whisper venomous. "You think this ends because you brought the law into it? You don't understand storms, Richard. They don't pass. They circle back. Always." Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He watched as Marcus was led toward a squad car, his eyes gleaming with a predator's promise. Hours later, back at his penthouse, Richard stood at the window, the city stretching endlessly below. Harris poured himself another drink, shaking his head. "You know he'll slip the net," Harris said. "Men like Marcus always do." Richard nodded slowly. "I know. Then what did tonight accomplish?" Richard looked down at his hand. The ring gleamed faintly in the city's light, its inscription pressing against his skin. He thought of Naomi's drawings. Lisa's tears. The fragile trust she had handed him. "It reminded him," Richard said quietly. "And it reminded me. He's not the only one who can play the long game." Harris studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "You'd better be ready," he said finally. "Because the storm isn't gone. It's only gathering." Richard turned back to the city, his reflection staring at him in the glass. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of family, not just fortune. And he knew, the fight was only beginning. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains of Lisa's apartment, painting the small kitchen in gold. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the streets washed clean. Naomi sat at the table, a cereal bowl in front of her and her sketchbook open beside it. She hummed softly as she drew, pencil scratching against the page. Richard stood in the doorway, watching quietly. The sight of her, hair mussed from sleep, eyes bright with focus, stirred something deep inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of belonging. Naomi glanced up, spotting him. Her face lit instantly. "You stayed." Richard smiled faintly, stepping into the room. "I told you I would." She beamed and turned the sketchbook toward him. "Look. I drew last night." On the page was a picture of three figures standing in the rain, the storm raging around them. But their hands were clasped, their faces calm. Above them, Naomi had drawn a single word in bold letters, "Together." Richard's chest tightened. He ran a hand gently over the page, careful not to smudge the lines. "It's perfect." Lisa entered then, still in her robe, a mug of coffee in her hands. She froze when she saw Richard at the table. For a moment, the old walls slid back into place across her face. But Naomi spoke before silence could stretch too long. "Mom, he stayed. He promised." Lisa's eyes softened, though her expression remained cautious. "Promises are easy to make, Naomi." Richard met her gaze steadily. "And hard to keep. But I intend to." For a long moment, they held each other's eyes. Old wounds, old love, fear, and something unspoken passed between them. Finally, Lisa set her mug down and pulled out a chair. "Then sit," she said quietly. Richard did. The three of them ate together. Naomi chattering, Lisa listening with half smiles, Richard adding small comments here and there. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't seamless. But it was something. For Richard, it was everything. Later, as Naomi packed her backpack for school, Richard helped her gather her pencils. She looked up at him suddenly, serious. "You're not going to leave again, are you?" Richard crouched down, meeting her eyes. "No. Not again." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Because Mom always says storms don't last forever. And if you're here when it clears, that means you really stayed." Her words echoed the inscription inside his ring, the words that had haunted him for years. "This storm too shall pass. He pulled her into a hug, his throat tight. "I'll be here." That evening, Richard walked Lisa back from the hotel after her shift. The city glowed around them, traffic buzzing, the smell of street food mingling with rain still clinging to the air. "You don't have to do this," Lisa said quietly. "Yes, I do. You've got your world," she pressed. "Your business, your empire." "None of that matters," Richard interrupted. His tone was steady, but his eyes burned with conviction. "Not if I lose you again. Not if I lose her." Lisa's steps slowed. She looked at him for a long moment, searching for the man she once knew. And maybe, just maybe, she saw him again. "Then don't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. Richard nodded. "I won't." When they reached the apartment, Naomi was already asleep. Lisa lingered at the door, hand resting on the frame. "Good night, Richard." He hesitated. "Lisa." She turned, her eyes wary but softened. "Thank you," he said simply. She gave a faint nod before closing the door. Richard stood there for a moment, the night air cool against his face. For the first time in years, he felt both lighter and heavier, lighter because of the fragile hope rekindled, heavier because of the promise he had made. As he walked toward his car, a chill rippled through him. At the far end of the street, parked beneath a flickering lamppost, sat a black sedan. Its windows were tinted, its engine silent. Richard stopped, his heart pounding. The driver didn't move. The car didn't leave. It simply sat there, watching. Richard clenched his fists, forcing himself not to show fear. Not to retreat. He turned, walked to his car, and drove away, though the weight of those unseen eyes followed him long after the street disappeared in his rearview mirror. The storm wasn't over. It was only circling. And Richard knew, the fight had only just begun.